RAM is becoming the silent victim of the AI boom. And if this continues, it will not just be PC builders who pay the price. Laptops will get more expensive, phones will get more expensive, game consoles could be delayed. That may sound like a small problem, but when even RAM starts being fought over, this is no longer just a PC market story. It is a sign that AI is beginning to pull too many resources away from the rest of the technology industry. So what is actually happening? Why is AI consuming so much memory? And is this just another temporary price spike or the beginning of a much bigger crisis? Stay until the end, because the most important part of this story is not just how much RAM AI needs, it is the fact that even people who do not use powerful AI tools are starting to pay for it. To understand why this is becoming dangerous, we first need to understand what RAM really is. RAM is where a computer holds data that needs to be used immediately. When you open apps, load games, edit video, or switch between tasks, that data sits there. Put simply, storage is where data is kept, while RAM is where the system actively works with it. The less RAM you have or the slower it is, the more easily a system starts to choke. For everyday users, that means lag, slowdowns, and frustration. But for AI, the problem is much bigger. Because in AI, memory does not just affect speed. It affects how large a model can be, how fast it can run, and how much data it can process at once. And that is where the story changes completely. Large AI models like ChatGPT, Gemini, and DeepSeek have to process enormous amounts of data. During training, the system has to read, compare, update, and repeat operations continuously at massive scale. Then during inference, when users start asking questions, it still needs a huge amount of memory to hold context, retrieve information, and respond quickly enough. Put simply, AI does not just need powerful chips, it also needs a huge amount of memory alongside them, and not just a little more. It needs so much that it can distort supply and demand across the entire market. That is why RAM is becoming one of the most fiercely contested resources in the AI era. If the gold rush made the shovel and the pickaxe incredibly valuable, then in the AI boom, one of the most important tools is memory. The difference is that AI companies do not buy memory the way ordinary consumers do. They buy at enormous scale. They lock in long-term contracts, and they are willing to pay a premium to secure supply for themselves. Once that happens, RAM is no longer just a commodity part. It starts becoming something large corporations compete to control, and that is only the beginning. Because the stranger part is this, even people who are not building AI data centers are still paying the price. And this is where the real problem begins. AI does not use exactly the same kind of RAM that goes into a gaming PC or a laptop. So why are consumer RAM prices still getting pushed up? The answer lies in a part of the supply chain that most people never see, the memory chip supply underneath it all. On the market, you see many RAM brands, but at the chip manufacturing level, most of the world still depends on just three major companies: Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron. And that is the real bottleneck. Because even though memory for AI, servers, laptops, and gaming systems ends up as different products, they still compete for the same underlying chip capacity, the same wafers, and the same fabs behind the scenes. In other words, someone buying RAM for a gaming PC and an AI company expanding a data center are ultimately pulling from the same supply base. The only difference is that one side can afford to pay far more than the other, and in a market like that, the outcome is almost predictable. Memory manufacturers will prioritize whoever brings in more money, larger contracts, and more stable revenue. That means enterprise customers, that means data centers, that means AI. Consumers do not disappear from the market, but they do get pushed to the back of the line. And that is why even people who are not building AI systems and are not running data centers are still paying for this boom. And this is only half the story. Because the next question is even more frustrating. If demand is this high, why do memory makers not simply produce more? It sounds easy, but the memory industry cannot ramp up supply the way many other industries can. Modern chip fabs already run close to full capacity. And this is not the kind of factory where you can just add overtime and instantly raise output. Chip production is extremely complex and highly sensitive. A small mistake can affect an entire batch. To create real new supply, manufacturers have to expand existing fabs or build new ones. And that is not just a matter of putting up another building, it also requires electricity, water, chemicals, wafers, engineers, logistics, and an entire industrial ecosystem around it. That is why adding meaningful new capacity usually takes years. But there is an even more important reason. Memory makers are not just looking at today's high prices, they are looking several years ahead. If they believe the current AI boom has bubble-like characteristics, they will not want to pour billions of dollars into new capacity, only to find that demand has cooled by the time those factories are ready. And this is not a hypothetical risk. The DRAM industry has already lived through this cycle many times. shortages, price spikes, capacity expansion, and then oversupply followed by collapsing prices. Manufacturers remember those lessons very well. So the problem is not just that they cannot increase supply fast enough. In many cases, they also do not want to expand too aggressively. That is why RAM prices are not rising only because of shortages. They are also rising because memory makers do not want to repeat the crash of previous cycles. At that point, this no longer looks like a simple temporary shock. It becomes the result of an industry that is benefiting from today's boom while also fearing the damage that same boom could cause later. And this is where the story stops being just about gamers. When memory becomes a bottleneck, the effects spread across almost the entire electronics market. Laptops get more expensive, phones face more cost pressure, game consoles may be delayed or forced to cut specs to keep prices under control. PC makers may also go back to selling systems with lower memory configurations than users actually want, and in the end, the buyer is the one who absorbs that cost. That is why the RAM crisis matters more than it first appears. This is not just a story about one component getting more expensive. This is the cost of the data center boom spreading into the rest of the technology market, because memory is a core input for almost every modern device. When memory prices rise, it becomes very difficult for everything else to stay unchanged. And when that happens at the same time, AI is consuming more electricity, more water, more land, more capital, and more infrastructure, the bigger picture starts to come into focus. AI is no longer just a software story. It is becoming a real-world competition for physical resources. From electricity, to water, to land for data centers, to chips, and now memory. That is the point where the RAM story stops being just about tech enthusiasts. It becomes a story about economics, infrastructure, and the way AI is starting to put pressure on the physical supply chain behind the digital world. And that is also why the next question matters so much. Is there any real way out of this crisis, or will consumers simply have to accept higher prices? The bad news is that there is no way to make RAM cheap again overnight. But over the medium and long term, there are still a few possible paths forward. The first is diversifying supply. If the world continues to depend mostly on just 3 major memory manufacturers, then every future surge in demand could trigger the same kind of problem all over again. Companies like China's CXMT could become an important variable, even if they still need more time to reach enough scale. The second path is that the AI industry will have to become more memory efficient. Not every problem can keep being solved by throwing more hardware at it. When costs rise too quickly, sooner or later the market will force companies to move away from the mindset that bigger is always better and toward efficiency. The third path is on the consumer side. At a time like this, making smart buying decisions matters more than chasing the newest hardware. If you are building a gaming PC for 1440p or higher, many older DDR4 platforms still offer very strong value. Not everyone needs DDR5 right now, and not everyone needs to pay significantly more for what may only be a small performance game. Finally, if the AI boom cools down, the pressure on memory will eventually ease, but even if that happens, prices probably will not fall immediately, because much of the future supply has already been locked up through contracts and pre-booked capacity. In other words, there is a way out, but it will come slowly. And in the meantime, consumers will still be the ones forced to adapt first. The RAM crisis is not just a story about component prices going up. It shows that AI is growing so quickly that real-world infrastructure is starting to fall behind. You can raise more capital, inflate valuations, and create bigger expectations, but you cannot instantly create more factories, more electricity, more water, or more memory chips. And when AI starts putting pressure on infrastructure, the cost eventually reaches consumers. It shows up in laptops, phones, game consoles, and countless other devices. If you enjoy videos analyzing economics, technology, and infrastructure, make sure to subscribe. If you found this video thought-provoking, like it, share it, and leave a comment. Do you think this is just a temporary shock, or is it a sign that AI is making technology permanently more expensive? Thanks for watching until the end. Wishing you peace and happiness.